I was staring at a $16,000 invoice with my name on it, for a pool I had never seen, let alone dipped a toe in. I thought it was a scam, until I realized it came straight from my HOA, complete with threats of property liens and legal action. The best part? I didn't even have the code to the gate that led to this so-called community pool. That's when I started digging. And what I uncovered? Hidden kickbacks, a private key club for board members, and a decades-old cover-up that made my $16,000 charge look like pocket change compared to what they were really hiding. And let's just say, by the time I was done, they weren't just refunding my money, they were begging me to stop talking. The bill came out of nowhere. No warning, no prior notice, just a fat white envelope with final notice stamped in angry red ink across the top. Inside was a 6-page letter full of legal jargon and vague financial breakdowns. The bottom line hit like a punch to the stomach. $16,000 owed immediately, all for what they called emergency upgrades and long-term maintenance of shared water recreation facilities. Shared? I hadn't stepped foot in that place since I moved into the neighborhood 4 years ago. At first, I thought it was a prank, or maybe they got the wrong person. I double-checked the address and my name on every page. Nope, it was directed at me specifically. My blood started to boil as I remembered that I didn't even have the gate code to the community pool. I'd asked for it the first summer I moved in, never got a reply. Figured it was just a slow system, or that I had to register in person. When I followed up again, the HOA told me I had to wait for the next round of access approvals. That was 3 years ago. I called the HOA's customer service number, and after being on hold for nearly 40 minutes, I was finally patched through to someone who sounded like they were chewing gum while scrolling Instagram. I calmly explained that I had never once used the pool, didn't even know how to get in, and had no idea why I was being charged this kind of money. The rep didn't even pretend to sympathize. "It's part of the community's collective responsibility," she said flatly. "Access doesn't determine contribution. Everyone pays the same." That line alone told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't about fairness. It was about control and money. I started doing the math. My neighborhood had about 150 homes. If everyone got billed what I did, that's $2.4 million for what? A new diving board and some fresh tiles? Something didn't add up. Curious, I reached out to my neighbors. I expected some shared outrage, but what I found was even worse. Almost no one else had been billed. A few had seen small increases in their monthly dues, maybe $20 or $30, but no one had received a lump sum bill like I had. One neighbor, an older man who lived across the street, said he had just received a new access code 2 weeks ago and was invited to the board's member-only summer kickoff. Meanwhile, I was getting slapped with the kind of bill you'd expect from a luxury resort. At that point, I figured the HOA must have made a clerical mistake. Maybe someone entered the wrong account number. I wrote a letter of dispute, attached proof that I'd never used the facility, and even included screenshots of my past requests for gate access. I dropped it off in person at the HOA office, expecting that to settle the matter. But within a week, I got a second notice, this time with a warning of potential lien action on my property if I didn't pay within 30 days. My jaw dropped. Not only were they not backing down, but they were doubling down. I emailed the HOA president directly. No reply. I left 3 voicemails. Nothing. Then, out of pure frustration, I drove to the pool myself. I wanted to see it up, close, to understand what was supposedly worth $16,000. What I found was infuriating. The pool area was pristine, too pristine. Fresh landscaping, new stone pavers, lounge chairs that looked like they belonged at a high-end hotel. It didn't, look like a community pool. It looked like a private resort, and it wasn't empty. There were maybe a dozen people lounging around, all wearing HOA staff polos or lanyards, sipping drinks and laughing. It felt like I had walked into a club I wasn't invited to. I stood at the gate and stared. No one even acknowledged me. I tried to push the gate open. It was locked. I didn't even have the option to be there, but I was expected to pay for it. That moment was the turning point. I took out my phone, took a few pictures, and decided right then I wasn't going to let this slide. Something about this felt off. The bill, the gate access, the exclusivity, the silence from the board. It all screamed cover-up. If they thought I was just going to write a check and go away quietly, they clearly didn't know who they were dealing with. This wasn't just about a pool anymore. This was about accountability. And I was ready to find out just how deep this rabbit hole went. After that infuriating visit to the pool, I decided to dig deeper into this so-called shared amenity. Clearly, something wasn't adding up. If the pool was meant for the community, why did it feel like a private club? Why were some neighbors granted access while others were left out and still billed like premium members? My first move was to get proof of the gate access system. I filed a formal written request under the HOA's own rules, asking for the current list of pool-accessible residents. I worded it professionally, invoking the HOA's bylaws about transparency and equal access to amenities. A week later, I got a response, not from the board, but from a third-party legal rep. It was a boilerplate denial stating that resident access lists were private information not subject to release. That was a massive red flag. If the pool was a shared facility paid for by dues and assessments, then access should be equal and transparent. Why the secrecy? So I started asking neighbors again, but this time I got strategic. I made a little map of my street and began marking who had access and who didn't. The pattern was almost laughable. The HOA board members and their friends all had access. Longtime residents who attended board meetings or participated in neighborhood improvement committees had access. But newer homeowners like me? Shut out. I counted at least 28 houses. Without pool access, most of whom had recently moved in or had disagreements with the board in the past. I even found one neighbor. Amanda, who had lived there for 6 years, paid every HOA due on time, submitted for access 4 times, and still never received a working code. When she confronted the board, they claimed she hadn't completed the orientation for new amenity users. Orientation? For a pool? Another resident told me they were denied because their lawn had been cited twice for minor aesthetic violations, which, according to the board, reflected poorly on shared space users. Basically, if the board didn't like you or thought your grass was too long, they'd cut you off from everything, but still charge you for it. The more I learned, the more I realized this wasn't just negligence. It was a systematic gatekeeping operation. The HOA was maintaining the illusion of a community pool while actually operating it like a VIP-only resort for their inner circle. Meanwhile, they billed everyone else full price to keep the operation running. Still determined, I got my hands on a blueprint of the pool's construction and access system, thanks to a public county records request. That's when it got wild. The keypad system wasn't just a simple number code setup. It was integrated with a remote database maintained by a private contractor hired by the HOA. That means the board had full control over who got access, who got revoked, and when. They could log in from a computer and instantly activate or deactivate access for anyone. And get this, the contractor's service agreement had an amendment added last year, giving HOA board members discretionary power to limit access based on subjective security concerns. In plain English, if they didn't trust you, like you, or want you near the pool, they could lock you out. No oversight, no review, just complete unchecked power. I tried calling the access system provider myself to confirm. They wouldn't give details, but the rep did confirm that the HOA chose to manually vet and assign users on a rolling basis. I asked how often they updated it. Rarely, she said. Only if there's an incident or a new access push by the board. So, again, only the favored few got through. By now, my $16,000 bill felt less like a fee and more like a shakedown. I was being extorted to support a luxury I wasn't allowed to use. Worse, I wasn't the only one. I gathered sworn statements from 5 neighbors, all with similar stories. Denied access, ignored requests, and arbitrary reasons for rejection. Some were scared to speak out publicly, afraid of retaliation or new violations. I wasn't scared. I printed everything, made copies, compiled emails, timestamps, witness statements. I even filmed a new video of myself trying to enter the pool gate, with a clear view of the keypad rejecting every attempt and a board member walking in seconds later. This wasn't just about HOA greed anymore. This was exclusion, discrimination, and misappropriation of community funds. The next step was clear. I needed outside help. The HOA wasn't going to listen to logic or fairness. They thought they were above the rules. It was time to show them they weren't. I contacted a lawyer, and that's when everything really started to unravel. Frustration had boiled over into obsession. I wasn't just annoyed anymore, I was determined. If this HOA thought they could exploit residents and silence dissent, they hadn't met someone like me yet. That's when I started uncovering pieces of a much darker puzzle, and it all began with Helen. Helen lived 2 blocks down in a quiet corner lot with wind chimes and a Navy flag in her yard. When I knocked on her door, she answered cautiously, but invited me in once I mentioned the pool situation. She'd heard my name floating around. I guess my emails and questions had already made waves, but what she told me was nothing I expected. Helen had been on the HOA board a decade ago. She didn't leave on good terms. She said things started out normal. Budget meetings, maintenance planning, the usual community stuff. But it all changed when the current president, Rick, joined. Quietly, without much notice, the board began funneling more funds into community enhancement programs. Vague line items that ballooned year after year. She showed me old emails she had saved on HOA, a dusty flash drive. They detailed internal arguments, Helen questioning a $9,200 expense labeled seasonal ambiance, another member pushing back on why gate access upgrades cost $14,000 when nothing had visibly changed. The replies were curt, dismissive, and eventually threatening. One chilling line in particular stuck with me. In response to her concerns, Rick had written, "Helen, you've served your time. Don't make this harder on yourself. The community benefits from discretion." When she pushed back harder, her access was revoked. First to the board portal, then to the pool. Then she received a violation notice claiming she had improper exterior holiday lighting in July. She knew she was being targeted, and she quietly stepped away. The worst part? Helen told me about a second account, an off-books maintenance reserve that only Rick and the treasurer could access. Technically, it wasn't illegal. They'd voted on it during a sparsely attended meeting and buried it in the footnotes of a meeting summary. But where that money went? That was the shady part. Catered HOA board parties. A full private pool repaint that never happened. Security enhancements that just so happened to benefit board members' personal properties. One entry listed as community appreciation, which turned out to be a board-only weekend retreat at a spa resort an hour away. The same pool that locked me out? It had apparently hosted a private birthday bash for a board member's grandkid, paid for with HOA funds. And yes, there were photos. Helen had them printed in a little folder labeled "Insurance Just in Case." I left Helen's house with my head spinning. But now I had something solid. Proof, witnesses, and a clearer picture of how deep the corruption went. Still, I needed more. So I called the locksmith who'd installed the electronic gate system. At first, he was tight-lipped. He had an agreement with the HOA. But once I explained what was going on and hinted at a legal investigation, he cracked. He told me something wild. The keypads weren't broken. They were programmed to fail certain codes. That's right. They didn't just not give you a code. They gave you a code, then blocked it on the back end. The screen would flash error or timeout, making you think it was a glitch. But it was intentional. He even remembered a strange call a few months ago. Someone on the board asked how to flag problematic users to restrict access quietly without removing them publicly. It felt shady, he said, but they were the client. Armed with Helen's documents and this new information, I started piecing together a timeline. Each year, dues increased. Each year, a portion of those dues got rerouted. Each year, fewer residents got access to amenities they were paying for. But here's what really got me angry. This wasn't just about the pool. That reserve account, it funded everything from unnecessary landscaping upgrades to a $7,000 decorative rock wall behind the president's home, listed as wind erosion control. The same treasurer who claimed we couldn't afford universal keycards had recently had her driveway repaved using HOA aesthetic matching funds. It was theft. It was elitism. And worst of all, it was so carefully orchestrated that most people never noticed. Or if they did, they were too afraid to speak up. Well, not me. This wasn't just a pool problem anymore. This was a full-blown misuse of community funds, targeted exclusion, and a violation of the HOA's own bylaws. And I was going to burn it all down, by the book and in the spotlight. The board thought this would go away if they ignored it. They thought I'd give up like everyone else. They were wrong. When the note arrived, folded twice, no envelope, just shoved into my mailbox, I realized something important. This wasn't just about HOA corruption anymore. It was personal. Someone on the board knew I was getting close, and now they were trying to scare me into silence. But fear wasn't part of my wiring. Not after everything I'd already seen. I knew I needed proof. Hard, irrefutable evidence that showed the public and law enforcement exactly what was happening behind those locked pool gates. So I set up a motion-activated trail camera hidden in the bushes across from the pool entrance. Not for privacy invasion, just to log who was getting in, when, and how often. I positioned it low, angled just right, and checked the footage every morning. By day 3, I struck gold. The board members were hosting late-night gatherings at the pool, exclusive ones. Their spouses, kids, and even guests from outside the neighborhood were casually strolling in and out. I saw coolers being wheeled through the gate, party balloons, and even a string of Edison lights hanging along the fencing like they were prepping for a wedding reception. One video caught the HOA treasurer unlocking the gate with a fob, then waving in 2 people who didn't even live in the community. They brought folding chairs and champagne. It was 9:17 p.m. on a Wednesday. Meanwhile, families like mine, who had shelled out thousands in dues and surprise access fees, were locked out. My own daughter had never even seen the inside of that pool. I compiled 3 days of footage and attached it to an official report, submitting it through the HOA's online complaint system. Then, just to be safe, I also sent copies to the city council, local news, and an attorney who specialized in HOA fraud. The very next morning, my camera was gone, ripped from its mounting, casing cracked in half like someone stomped on it. No note this time, just silence, but they had made their mistake, because I had already backed everything up, and I wasn't done. I started digging into the pool's surveillance system. The one they claimed was down for maintenance every time someone asked for footage. A neighbor tipped me off that the maintenance closet behind the pool was never actually locked. One night I walked over pretending to be on a jog, waited until the streetlights flickered, and slipped inside. What I found was nothing short of a gold mine. The digital DVR recorder was still running, fully functional. It had a blinking red light and a hard drive full of footage. They hadn't shut it off. They were just lying about it. I quickly photographed everything: the serial number, the system logs, the footage timestamps. I didn't touch anything else. The next day, I filed an urgent complaint with the State Housing Authority. This was no longer just mismanagement, it was cover-up behavior, potentially bordering on criminal obstruction. Then came the kicker. Another neighbor A veteran like myself shared a stunning revelation. He had kept his old pool access fob out of habit and decided to try it last week. And it still worked. But only his. His wife's code, given through the general HOA channel, was disabled, meaning the system was programmed to block certain residents based on a blacklist, something the locksmith had already hinted at. I finally had a pattern. The board wasn't just prioritizing themselves, they were selectively denying access to residents who questioned them, made noise, or dug too deep. The pool had become their reward system. You comply, you swim, you resist, you're locked out and billed anyway. My folder of evidence had grown thick. Photos, logs, screenshots of financial reports, resident testimonials, camera footage, and now technical proof of discriminatory access settings. But the biggest break came from a former contractor who worked briefly with the HOA 2 summers ago. He reached out after hearing whispers about the pool scandal. He told me that during his time maintaining landscaping around the pool, he was instructed not to prune certain bushes near the entrance gate because they provide cover. When he asked why that was important, the HOA VP allegedly joked, "We have a secret door." At first, it sounded absurd, until I remembered an odd-looking gate panel behind the pool facing a side alley. It had always looked out of place, partially rusted, half covered in vines. That night, I went and checked. It wasn't locked. It opened directly into the pool deck. That emergency exit had been converted into a hidden entrance, and it wasn't tied to any keypad or security system. Anyone with the right knowledge could enter undetected. This wasn't just abuse of power. It was deliberate manipulation, a two-tiered system where those in control exploited the very people they were elected to represent. The HOA billed me $16,000. For a community feature they used like a private club, while blocking me from it, lying to my face and threatening me when I got too close. Now I had everything I needed, and I wasn't just going to expose them. I was going to make sure they were held accountable in front of every homeowner they'd ever cheated. I decided it was time to escalate beyond complaints and community whispers. I contacted a professional HOA auditor, someone with decades of experience unraveling the creative accounting tricks shady boards use to hide funds. His name was Greg, and he had the calm demeanor of a man who'd seen far worse than rogue pool parties. Greg asked for 3 years' worth of public budget records. The HOA legally had to provide them, and when they hesitated, my lawyer sent a formal records request under state HOA transparency laws. Reluctantly, they delivered, but not before redacting entire pages and blacking out line items they claimed were vendor-sensitive. Greg smiled when he saw them. "They always redact the wrong stuff. Watch." It took him less than a week to find the rot. Duplicate invoices listed under different contractor names, overlapping payments that made no sense, landscaping fees that didn't match any actual vendor in the county. A mysterious line called aquatic maintenance support billed monthly at $2,200, with no breakdown, no description, and no receipts. That one showed up for 36 months straight. When Greg added it all up, he found over $220,000 in pool-related spending in just 3 years, and not a single resident we interviewed could confirm any major repairs or upgrades during that time. In fact, most of them had been complaining for years about cracked tiles, algae buildup, and broken showers. It was a phantom budget, a siphon, a shell game hiding in plain sight. We handed the findings to my lawyer, who immediately filed for a financial subpoena. Once the board received notice, the mood shifted instantly. Within 48 hours, 3 members of the board, president, treasurer, and facilities chair, submitted their resignations. The pool was suddenly closed for repairs. And my $16,000 fine? Now it was mysteriously labeled under review. Neighbors who once brushed me off as paranoid were now knocking on my door asking for details. The data spread like wildfire, first through private group chats, then through the neighborhood Facebook page, and finally through the local news When one journalist picked up the story and published a full exposé, that's when everything cracked, wide open. One former HOA secretary came forward with her own revelations. She'd quit a year ago after discovering discrepancies in the maintenance logs. According to her, the pool's access system had been flagged internally multiple times for user mismatches, people entering under other residents' credentials, even after they had moved out or passed away. When she brought it up, she was told to leave it alone. Shortly after that, she was let go under vague policy violations. Her documents supported Greg's audit. Another neighbor came forward with a folder of photos showing party setups at the pool, tables, DJ speakers, even waitstaff on weekends that were never announced in any HOA calendar. The people in the photos, mostly the same faces from the audit, the board members, their friends, and even some out-of-towners who didn't live in our zip code. The image was clear now. The pool was a private club funded by public money, and anyone who questioned the arrangement, fined, threatened, and blacklisted. But here's where it got really damning. Greg's investigation led him to a management consultant who had been contracted by the HOA multiple times. This consultant was the brother-in-law of the now resigned treasurer. Payments to him totaled over $45,000. Again, all under vague descriptions like facility optimization and budget realignment. None of the residents had ever heard of him. He had never attended a meeting. No documentation existed for what exactly he had done, except that he signed invoices under a defunct LLC registered out of state. This wasn't just mismanagement. This was fraud, potentially criminal fraud. My attorney contacted the state's Department of Consumer Affairs and submitted the full audit, sworn testimonies, and subpoenaed financial documents. They responded in under a week. An official investigation had been opened. The timing couldn't have been better. The annual board elections were coming up, and now, for the first time in years, residents were motivated. New candidates stepped forward. One ran on a platform of full transparency. Another promised to install live pool access logs and make every expense public within 48 hours. Me? I stayed behind the scenes, making sure the right voices were amplified and that no resident forgot how deep this had gone. The HOA billed me $16,000 for something I never had access to. But in trying to silence me, they exposed every skeleton they thought would stay buried. Now the only thing left was to make sure they never had the power to do it again. Within days of the audit findings going public, our sleepy suburban community became a battleground of truth versus corruption. Residents who had once rolled their eyes at HOA politics now attended emergency meetings in droves, standing room only, spilling out onto sidewalks. The agenda? A formal recall vote to remove the remaining board members who hadn't yet fled under the heat of exposure. It wasn't just about the pool anymore. It was about the lies, the control, the years of intimidation and silencing of anyone who asked where the money went. One neighbor uncovered archived emails where a board member openly referred to non-access residents as gate peasants. The emails were part of a digital backup left on a shared community platform that someone forgot to lock down. The phrase spread like wildfire, and suddenly, every resident knew exactly how the board viewed us. The narrative shifted from quiet frustration to collective outrage. Even the elderly residents, who usually stayed out of disputes, began attending meetings and demanding accountability. Then came the whistleblower. A former board assistant anonymously released a trove of emails and memos showing intentional misreporting of pool maintenance expenses. One message even included a line that said, "Make sure to code it under seasonal upgrades so no one flags it during audit season." That one message was enough for the local investigative news team to pick up the story. They aired a 5-minute expose during prime time, complete with interviews from residents, footage of the padlocked pool gate, and even a snippet of my lawyer, explaining how HOA funds are not the private property of board members. After the segment aired, everything snowballed. State regulators officially launched a formal inquiry. A class action lawsuit was filed by a group of residents demanding restitution for misused funds. The management company hired by the HOA quickly distanced themselves, terminating their contract and releasing a statement that essentially said, "We had no idea what they were doing. Turns out they did, and they were next on the list for investigation." Meanwhile, the HOA tried to go on damage control. They offered token gestures, like waiving upcoming dues or fast-tracking access, key requests. But it was too late. The trust was gone. As the pressure mounted, more skeletons came out. One resident found out the HOA had been collecting fees for a fitness center maintenance fund. We don't even have a fitness center. Another dug up a landscaping invoice that included charges for seasonal flowers, despite our entire entrance being paved and plantless. I stood at the next community meeting and gave a quiet, factual update. The gate had finally been reprogrammed, and all residents had received key fobs. No apology, no explanation from the board. Just silence and forced smiles. But the real victory wasn't the gate. It was the vote. In the biggest turnout in our HOA's history, the residents voted unanimously to recall every sitting board member still clinging to power. A temporary oversight committee, elected by the community, was put in place to handle operations while a full re-election was organized. I didn't run. I didn't need to. New faces stepped forward. People who weren't in it for power or kickbacks, just fairness. Greg, the auditor, was hired permanently to oversee annual budgets and publish all expenses online in real time. Every dime would now be transparent. The most poetic moment came a few weeks later when I got a letter in the mail. No return address, just an HOA envelope. Inside was a single piece of paper, a formal notice stating that my $16,000 pool fine had been voided and cleared due to clerical error. No apology, no compensation, no admission, but that's fine, because I framed it, and beneath it, I hung my new pool access key. I walk by that pool now every week. Sometimes I sit by it, not even to swim, just to be seen. Residents nod when they pass me. Some stop to talk. Others just look relieved that the gate finally opens for all of us, not just a chosen few. The board tried to make me an example, punish one resident into submission to scare the rest. But in doing so, they triggered the exact opposite. They created a movement. And now, every single hole they tried to hide has been dug up and filled with truth. Justice didn't just come, we delivered it. If this story fired you up even half as much as it did me, then don't just scroll away. Hit that like button too. Let YouTube know HOA corruption won't go unchecked. Subscribe to the HOA Stories for more true, jaw-dropping battles between homeowners and power-hungry boards. And if your HOA has crossed the line, drop your story in the comments. We might just feature it next. Your voice matters. Let's expose them, one scandal at a time.